Ethan Reeves adjusted his tie in the elevator's mirrored wall, the subtle charcoal fabric of his tailored suit reflecting the soft ambient lighting. At 32, his career as a professional companion had taken him to penthouses and private islands, but never to a location as secured as this downtown high-rise with its military-grade security protocols. The contract had arrived through his most exclusive agency, 6 months, unprecedented compensation, and non-negotiable discretion. No questions, no personal inquiries, complete professional detachment. His role was simple: provide companionship, conversation, and whatever personal comfort the client required. The agency had been unusually insistent on the confidentiality aspects, even by their standards. Identification confirmed. "Welcome, Mr. Reeves," announced a disembodied voice as the elevator opened directly into a penthouse foyer. The apartment was minimalist to the point of sterility, all clean lines and neutral tones. No photos, no personal touches. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, but the glass was tinted, preventing anyone from seeing inside. "You're precisely on time." The voice came from behind him, melodic and controlled. Ethan turned to face his new client. She called herself Sarah, though the contract suggested this was an alias. She stood with perfect posture, draped in a simple blue dress that somehow managed to appear both modest and alluring. Her features were striking: high cheekbones, almond-shaped eyes of an unusual violet shade, and skin so flawless it seemed almost luminescent. "I value punctuality," Ethan replied with a practiced smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Ms. Sarah." "Just Sarah, please." She approached with a fluid grace that caught his attention. Something in her movement seemed almost too precise. "Would you care for a drink before we discuss the parameters of our arrangement?" As she led him to a seating area, Ethan noted other subtle irregularities. Her accent was unplaceable, as if she'd learned multiple languages simultaneously. Her mannerisms were formal, studied, as though human interaction were something she'd researched rather than experienced naturally. "Your agency speaks highly of your discretion," she said, pouring amber liquid into crystal glasses. "That quality is paramount for our arrangement." "Discretion is the foundation of my profession," Ethan assured her. "Whatever passes between us remains exclusively ours." Sarah handed him a glass, their fingers brushing momentarily. Hers were cool to the touch, sending an unexpected shiver up his arm. "Your contract outlines companionship duties. I require an escort for various diplomatic functions. Someone who presents well, converses intelligently, and adapts to changing social situations. That's well within my expertise. There will also be private engagements," she continued, her violet eyes studying him with scientific intensity. "I'm unfamiliar with certain human customs and intimacies. I may require instruction." Ethan maintained his professional demeanor despite his surprise. "I understand. That can be arranged if and when you're comfortable." For a moment, something like amusement flickered across her features. "Comfort is irrelevant. Efficiency and mutual satisfaction would be the metrics of success." She sipped her drink, then set it down untouched. "There are additional stipulations. You will not inquire about my work. You will not enter certain rooms in this apartment without explicit permission. You will never follow me or investigate my activities. Violation of these terms will result in immediate termination of our contract." "Understood completely," Ethan replied, though his curiosity was already piqued. "We begin tomorrow evening. A diplomatic reception at the consulate. Formal attire, minimal interaction with other guests unless I indicate otherwise." She stood, signaling the end of their meeting. "My assistant will contact you with details." As Ethan rode the elevator down, he couldn't shake the strange sense of dissonance. In his years as a professional companion, he'd encountered countless clients with eccentric requests and mysterious backgrounds, but something about Sarah felt fundamentally different, not just secretive, but somehow otherworldly. He glanced at the contract on his phone. The payment for 6 months exceeded what he'd typically earn in 3 years. Whatever game Sarah was playing, the compensation justified the peculiarities. Little did he know that the true price of this arrangement would be measured in far more than money, and that his first night with the mysterious woman with violet eyes would be the beginning of the most dangerous, and passionate, chapter of his life. 3 weeks into his contract with Sarah, Ethan found himself in uncharted territory. The diplomatic functions had been straightforward enough: galas, receptions, and private dinners where he played the attentive partner to perfection. Yet with each passing day, the list of peculiarities surrounding his enigmatic client grew longer. Tonight, they had returned from a closed-door meeting at what Sarah called the delegation. Ethan sat at the penthouse bar, nursing a whiskey while watching her pace the living room, speaking urgently in a language he'd never heard before, all flowing tones and clicks that no human throat should logically produce. Her communication device wasn't any commercial model he recognized. Wafer-thin and translucent, it seemed to respond to her thoughts more than her touch. When she noticed his observation, she abruptly switched to English and ended the call. "Is everything all right?" he asked carefully, mindful of their no-questions agreement. "Complications? Nothing that should concern you." She approached the bar, her movements betraying unusual tension. "I require comfort tonight, Ethan." The statement was direct, clinical even, but her eyes held something new: vulnerability perhaps, or simply necessity. Their physical relationship had evolved gradually over the weeks. What began as formal instruction in human intimacy had transformed into something more intense, more primal. "Of course," he replied, setting his glass down. Her kiss, when it came, was hungry. There was nothing tentative in the way her cool fingers traced his jawline, the way her body pressed against his with deliberate intent. In these moments, whatever distance she maintained in public evaporated completely. Later, as moonlight filtered through the penthouse windows, Ethan studied Sarah's sleeping form. The sheet draped across her revealed a shoulder adorned with what he'd initially mistaken for an elaborate tattoo, a delicate pattern of slightly raised markings that seemed to shimmer with opalescence when caught in certain light. He'd noticed other things too. How she rarely ate in his presence. How her breathing pattern differed from any human he'd known. How sometimes, in moments of passion, her eyes seemed to reflect light like a cat's. Against every professional instinct, against the explicit terms of his contract, Ethan's curiosity had become insatiable. With practiced stealth, he slipped from the bed. Sarah's sleep was always unusually deep after their intimate encounters, almost catatonic, as if her body required recovery time. It was the only opportunity he might have. The forbidden east wing of the penthouse had remained locked until now. But tonight, returning from the bathroom, Ethan had noticed Sarah's access card left carelessly on the counter, the first imperfection in her otherwise meticulous habits. The access panel beeped softly as he swiped the card. The door slid open to reveal what appeared to be a small medical facility. Temperature-controlled storage units lined one wall. A reclining chair that resembled a high-tech medical examination table dominated the center. Most disturbing were the vials of luminescent fluid that pulsed with an internal light. On a holographic display, data scrolled in the same indecipherable script he'd seen Sarah reading. But it was the image that captured his attention, a three-dimensional rendering of what appeared to be Sarah, but not quite. The proportions were slightly altered, the skull more elongated, the joints different. Beside it was an image he recognized immediately as human anatomy. The two were being compared, analyzed, with notations highlighting the differences. "I believed you to be more honorable than this." Ethan froze at the sound of Sarah's voice. He turned slowly to find her standing in the doorway, wrapped in a silk robe, her expression unreadable. "What are you?" he asked, abandoning all pretense. For a long moment, she simply observed him, her violet eyes calculating, assessing. Then she stepped into the room, the door sliding shut behind her. I am Seraphine Vari, diplomatic envoy of the Meridian Collective. Her voice remained calm, but carried new resonance. And you, Ethan Reeves, have just compromised a mission 60 years in preparation. You're not human. It wasn't a question. No. Though this form is partially human. She gestured to her body. Genetically modified to function on your world while maintaining essential aspects of my native physiology. Ethan's mind raced, connecting dozens of small observations that suddenly made perfect sense. The diplomatic functions. They weren't human politics at all. Earth stands at a crossroads, Ethan. There are factions among the stars with varying interests in your species. She approached him slowly. The collective seeks alliance. Others would prefer exploitation or isolation. And what was I to you, he asked, suddenly uncertain of everything. Just part of your cover story? Something changed in her expression then, a softening, a hesitation that seemed genuinely unplanned. Initially, yes. Her fingers brushed his cheek with that familiar coolness. But you have become an unanticipated complication. In the blue glow of the alien technology surrounding them, Ethan faced the most important decision of his life: walk away from a truth too vast to comprehend, or step into a universe far larger and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. And somewhere in the whirlwind of revelation, he realized that his feelings for Sarah, alien or not, had grown far beyond the parameters of any contract. Show me. Ethan's voice was steady despite the turmoil inside him. Show me who you really are. Sarah, or Seraphine, as she had called herself, studied him with those impossible violet eyes. Something like respect flickered across her features. Very few of your kind have witnessed a meridian in true form. She moved to the center of the medical chamber. It may be unsettling for you. I need to know the truth. She nodded once, then pressed her palm against a panel on the wall. The lights dimmed automatically as a gentle hum filled the room. The atmospheric composition here is maintained for my comfort in human form. What you're about to see requires temporary adjustment. As the air took on a subtle bluish tint, Sarah closed her eyes and removed her robe with ceremonial deliberation. For a moment, she stood naked before him, a vision of near-human perfection. Then her body began to change. The transformation was both beautiful and alien. Her skin shifted, the opalescent markings expanding across her body like flowing water. Her frame elongated, gaining perhaps 4 inches in height. The proportions of her limbs adjusted subtly, becoming more graceful yet powerful. Her features remained recognizable but shifted toward something more angular, more refined. The violet of her eyes expanded until there was no white visible, and her hair, now a shifting palette of colors that reminded Ethan of Aurora Borealis, moved as if suspended in water. This is the compromise form, she explained, her voice resonating differently. My true appearance would require environmental conditions fatal to humans. Ethan approached slowly, his professional detachment completely abandoned. May I? She extended her hand in permission. When his fingers met hers, the sensation was electric, a subtle current that seemed to pulse between them. Your body temperature, he observed. It's adapted to mimic humans. Yes. My natural state is considerably cooler. It requires significant energy to maintain the cellular modifications necessary for this form. Her eyes studied his reaction carefully. You're not afraid. I'm terrified, Ethan admitted with a small smile. But also fascinated. And? Still drawn to you. The confession surprised even him. Something like relief washed across her alien features. The connection between us was unexpected in my mission parameters. Physical relations were intended solely to maintain cover authenticity and to study human intimacy. I did not anticipate emotional entanglement. Ethan laughed softly. Is that what your people call it? For the first time, Seraphine's composure broke into something resembling genuine amusement. My kind experiences emotions differently, but not less intensely. Attachment is complex for us. Profound. Rare. Tell me about your mission, Ethan said, guiding her to sit beside him. The real one. Her form shimmered as she collected her thoughts. Earth is approaching a tipping point technologically. Within decades, your species will achieve capabilities that will attract attention from throughout the connected systems. The Meridian Collective wishes to establish diplomatic relations before that happens. But there are others who don't. The Valkyrie Dominion believes emerging species should be harvested for resources or subjugated. Her expression darkened. They have agents on Earth as well, working to sabotage our efforts and identify human weaknesses. And the meetings, the diplomatic functions? Contact with carefully selected human representatives. Scientists, political leaders, military officials, individuals being assessed for eventual disclosure. Ethan's mind reeled with implications. How much time do we have? The summit occurs in 3 weeks. If successful, Earth gains protected status and technological exchange rights. If not, she didn't need to finish. The weight of this knowledge settled on Ethan like a physical presence. His world had expanded beyond recognition in a single night. Yet strangely, as he looked at Seraphine in her true form, he felt an unexpected clarity. He reached for her hand again, marveling at the subtle luminescence that followed his touch across her skin. I want to help you. You cannot simply return to being my escort now that you know. No, he interrupted. Not as your escort. As your partner. Her eyes widened slightly. It would be dangerous. The Valkyrie agents. I've spent my life learning to read people, to anticipate needs, to blend seamlessly into any situation. He smiled. Turns out those skills might be useful for something more important than entertaining the wealthy. For a long moment, Seraphine said nothing. Then, with a grace that transcended species, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was different in this form, cooler, charged with subtle energy that tingled across his skin. When they separated, her form began shifting back toward human appearance. We must be careful. My quarters are secure, but the moment you leave this penthouse, you enter a world where anyone could be watching. Ethan nodded, the gravity of their situation returning. What happens now? Now, she said, her features settling back into the Sarah he had known, I teach you about worlds beyond your own. That night, their intimacy transcended physical boundaries. As Seraphine shared glimpses of her homeworld, crystalline cities suspended between massive trees, oceans that glowed with bioluminescent life, societies built on principles humans had barely conceived, Ethan's universe expanded exponentially. And when they came together physically, it was with new awareness, new understanding that transformed desire into something profound, a bridge between worlds that neither had anticipated when signing a simple contract. By morning, Ethan Reeves was no longer merely a professional companion. He had become something unprecedented in human history, confidant and lover to an alien diplomat on whom the future of Earth might well depend. The Meridian encryption device fit discreetly in Ethan's breast pocket, indistinguishable from a standard handkerchief square. Seraphine had given it to him that morning with solemn instructions, should they become separated, he was to activate it immediately. The penthouse was no longer considered secure. You understand that once you leave with me today, everything changes, she had warned, fastening the formal attire she'd selected for him. Her fingers lingered at his collar. The Valkyrie have extensive surveillance networks. They will identify you as more than a simple escort. I've made my choice, Ethan replied, covering her hand with his. Now, as their private transport glided toward the secluded diplomatic compound outside the city, Ethan observed the subtle changes in Seraphine's demeanor. In public, she maintained her human appearance, but her movements had become more vigilant, her attention constantly sweeping their surroundings. "The Valkyrie representative, Dorovan, will be present tonight," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the vehicle's noise-dampening field. "He appears human, but note the amber flecks in his irises and the stiffness in his right-hand movements. Do not engage him directly." "What about the other humans who know? The ones you've been meeting with?" "Ambassador Thorne and General Westfield are aware of our true nature. The others believe they're participating in conventional diplomatic negotiations." She turned to face him fully. "Remember, maintain the pretense of our professional relationship in public. The Valkyrie would exploit any emotional connection." The compound materialized through the tree line, a modernist structure of glass and stone that somehow seemed both earthly and alien in its perfect geometries. Guards with the bearing of Special Forces operators nodded respectfully as their vehicle passed through multiple security checkpoints. Inside, the gathering appeared superficially like any high-level diplomatic function. Distinguished individuals in formal attire engaged in measured conversation over champagne. Only the subtle differences in security protocols and the occasional unrecognizable technology disguised as conventional objects betrayed its true significance. "Stay within 3 meters of me," Seraphine instructed as they entered the main hall. "But interact naturally with the human delegates." For the first hour, Ethan performed flawlessly, drawing on years of experience in elite social circles. He charmed the human officials while maintaining appropriate professional distance from Seraphine. Yet beneath his practiced exterior, his senses remained hyper-alert, cataloging details as she had taught him, the distinctive communications devices disguised as jewelry, the subtle non-human mannerisms among certain diplomatic staff. It was during a momentary separation, Seraphine engaged with Ambassador Thorne while Ethan retrieved drinks, that he felt a presence at his elbow. "An interesting choice of companion she's made." The voice was perfectly modulated, yet something in its cadence raised alarms in Ethan's mind. One might question the security implications. Ethan turned to face a distinguished man with steel-gray hair and a diplomat's practiced smile. The amber flecks in his eyes caught the light unnaturally. "Dorovan. The Valkyrie representative." "I'm simply doing my job," Ethan replied with calculated indifference. "Are you?" Dorovan's smile never reached his eyes. "I wonder what your employers would think of your extracurricular activities in her private quarters. The ones not covered by your contract." Ice formed in Ethan's stomach. They had been watched. "You misunderstand our arrangement." "I understand perfectly." Dorovan moved closer, his voice dropping. "Humans are so easily manipulated through physical attachment. She's selected you carefully, intelligent enough to be useful, naive enough to be loyal. When her kind have stripped your world of resources, what do you imagine will happen to their pets?" Before Ethan could respond, he felt Seraphine's cool touch at his back. "Delegate Dorovan," she acknowledged with diplomatic precision. "I see you've met my escort. Charming company you keep, Envoy Seraphine." Dorovan's smile tightened. "Though perhaps not appropriate for discussions of planetary consequence. My staffing choices are not the Dominion's concern." Her tone remained pleasant, but Ethan felt the subtle tensing of her body. "Everything on this planet is our concern." Dorovan's gaze shifted between them. "Especially unauthorized information sharing with primitive species." The threat hung in the air for a moment before Dorovan inclined his head slightly and moved away. "He knows," Ethan whispered once the Valkyrie representative was beyond earshot. "Yes." Seraphine's composure remained perfect, but her eyes tracked Dorovan across the room. "We need to leave. Now." They maintained decorum as they moved toward the exit, Seraphine exchanging brief farewells with key delegates. Only when they reached their transport did she allow her concern to show. "The Valkyrie have been monitoring us more closely than anticipated," she said as the vehicle accelerated away from the compound. "Your involvement has been compromised." What happens now? We cannot return to the penthouse. She pressed her palm against a concealed panel in the vehicle, activating systems Ethan couldn't identify. The summit location must be changed. All secure communications redirected. As the city lights receded behind them, Ethan felt the weight of his decision fully for the first time. There would be no returning to his former life now. I should be afraid, he realized aloud. Seraphine turned to him, her human disguise slipping just enough for her eyes to shine with their true violet intensity. Fear is rational in these circumstances. That's just it. I'm not afraid. He took her hand, feeling that familiar electric current between them. Not for myself, anyway. Something profound passed between them in that moment, something that transcended species and duty. Without words, Seraphine shifted closer, her form changing subtly beneath his touch as her control momentarily wavered. Their kiss was desperate, charged with the danger surrounding them. As the transport sped toward an uncertain sanctuary, human and alien came together with newfound urgency, bodies entwined, barriers between species momentarily forgotten in the primal need for connection before the coming storm. If we succeed, she whispered against his skin, our worlds will never be the same. And if we fail? Ethan asked, his fingers tracing the luminescent patterns emerging across her skin. Seraphine's answer was lost in the rhythm of their bodies as the vehicle carried them into darkness, two beings from different stars, united against forces that would keep their worlds divided forever. The safe house was buried deep in mountain wilderness, its exterior resembling an unremarkable vacation cabin while its interior housed technology centuries beyond human development. For 7 days, Ethan and Seraphine had lived in this strange limbo, planning, preparing, and waiting for the summit that would determine Earth's future. The transmission is complete, Seraphine announced, her true form shimmering in the blue light of the communication array. In the safety of the cabin, she no longer maintained her human appearance. The Collective Council has approved our alternate location and security protocols. Ethan looked up from the table where he'd been studying the dossiers of Earth's representatives, those few humans entrusted with humanity's first official extraterrestrial negotiation. And the Valkyrie? They've agreed to attend, though reluctantly. Her expression darkened. Doravan has filed a formal protest regarding your presence. On what grounds? Contamination of diplomatic channels through unauthorized species integration. She moved toward him with that fluid grace that still captivated him. In their view, humans should remain ignorant until formal subjugation agreements are established. Ethan's mouth tightened. Charming perspective. It is their way. Seraphine's cool fingers traced his jawline. For millennia, the Dominion has expanded through conquest rather than alliance. Your world represents a strategic position they covet. The proximity of her true form sent familiar electricity across his skin. After days together in this isolated sanctuary, Ethan had grown accustomed to her alien physiology, the subtle luminescence that intensified with emotion, the coolness of her touch that paradoxically ignited heat within him. Tomorrow changes everything, he said softly. Yes. A ripple of color moved through her aurora-like hair. One way or another. Their coming together that night carried the weight of possibility and peril. As Human and Meridian joined physically, their movements held a desperate intensity, each touch, each moment preserved against an uncertain future. Seraphine's control slipped entirely, her form shifting between Human and Meridian as waves of pleasure overwhelmed her physiological regulators. The cabin filled with soft light emanating from her skin as they moved as one being, transcending the biological barriers between their species. Afterward, lying tangled together, Ethan voiced the question that had haunted him for days. When this is over, when the treaty is signed, will you leave? Seraphine was silent for a long moment, her hand resting over his heart. My assignment was always temporary. The collective will require my report and expertise elsewhere. The words landed like physical pain. Ethan had known this answer logically, but hearing it spoken aloud crystallized the impossibility of their situation. "I understand," he said, though his embrace tightened involuntarily. "But perhaps." She hesitated, something she rarely did. Perhaps other arrangements could be negotiated. Morning brought crisp mountain air and renewed vigilance. As they prepared to depart for the summit location, a retrofitted military facility deep underground, Seraphine resumed her human appearance with practiced efficiency. "Remember, stay close to Ambassador Thorne," she instructed, adjusting Ethan's formal attire one final time. "If we're separated, he's authorized to protect you." The journey to the facility passed in tense silence. Upon arrival, the heightened security was immediately apparent, armed personnel with specialized equipment, scanning technologies disguised as conventional security measures, and the palpable tension of humans encountering the previously unimaginable. Inside the main chamber, delegates from both sides had assembled, the carefully selected human representatives still adjusting to the reality of extraterrestrial diplomacy, and the various alien envoys maintaining humanoid appearances of varying convincingness. Doravan's gaze locked onto Ethan immediately, amber eyes narrowing with unmistakable malice. The summit proceeded with formal introductions, careful positioning, and the meticulous language of diplomacy. Yet beneath the civility, Ethan sensed currents of power and danger. Seraphine stood resplendent as she presented the collective's proposal: protected status for Earth, technological exchange agreements, and mutual defense protocols. It was during a brief recess that disaster struck. Ethan was returning from a secured communications room when the first explosion rocked the facility. Emergency lights flashed as security personnel rushed past him. Through the chaos, he caught sight of Doravan moving with inhuman speed toward the chamber where Seraphine was reviewing documents with the human delegates. Without hesitation, Ethan changed direction, drawing the concealed meridian weapon Seraphine had trained him to use. He reached the chamber just as Doravan cornered Seraphine, his human disguise partially abandoned in his rage. "The treaty dies with you, Meridian," Doravan snarled, his right arm transforming into something metallic and lethal. Ethan fired without hesitation. The energy pulse caught Doravan in his transformed limb, destabilizing whatever technological enhancement powered it. The Valkyrie envoy turned in shock, clearly unprepared for human interference. That moment of distraction was all Seraphine needed. With preternatural speed, she engaged a device at her wrist. A field of shimmering energy enveloped Doravan, constricting until he collapsed unconscious. "Assassination was never the Dominion way," she said, breathing heavily as security forces flooded the room. "He acted alone, against protocol." In the aftermath, with the Valkyrie delegation in disarray and Doravan contained, the summit proceeded with renewed urgency. By nightfall, with Earth's representatives emboldened by the revealed Valkyrie treachery, the treaty was signed. Earth would enter the galactic community under Meridian protection. As celebrations began among the human delegates, Seraphine drew Ethan aside to a private observation deck overlooking the mountain range. "The Collective Council has transmitted new instructions," she said, her violet eyes searching his. "I am to establish a permanent embassy on Earth. The integration process will require decades of careful management." Hope sparked in Ethan's chest. "Then you're staying?" "Yes." A smile transformed her features. "But my final report included another recommendation. One that is unprecedented." "What recommendation?" "That Earth should send its own representative to the Meridian homeworld." Her cool fingers entwined with his. "Someone who has demonstrated extraordinary adaptability to interspecies relations. Someone who has already crossed boundaries thought insurmountable." Understanding dawned slowly. "Me? You want me to go with you to your world?" "Not immediately. The embassy work must be established first. But eventually, yes." Her form shimmered slightly as emotion affected her control. "It would mean leaving everything behind." Your world, your career, everything familiar. Ethan looked out at the mountains, then back to the extraordinary being before him, the alien who had transformed his understanding of the universe and of himself. My contract with the agency expired weeks ago, he said with a smile. I believe I'm available for a new position. As the treaty celebration continued below, Human and Meridian stood together at the threshold of possibility. The arrangement that had begun as a simple transaction had evolved into something revolutionary, a bridge between worlds, forged through curiosity, courage, and a connection that defied the vast distances of space. When they kissed, Seraphine allowed her human disguise to slip just enough for her true luminescence to shine through, a private display of what awaited them among the stars. The contract was fulfilled. The journey was just beginning.